What started as a routine late-night interview turned into television chaos when Nicolas Cage and Jimmy Kimmel engaged in a heated confrontation that left audiences stunned and the Oscar winners storming off set. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an incredible show tonight," Kimmel announced, his voice carrying that familiar mix of charm and barely concealed arrogance that had become his signature. "Our guest is one of Hollywood's most, let's say, unique actors. He's starred in everything from action blockbusters to art house films, and he's never been one to shy away from, well, interesting choices." The audience chuckled knowingly as Kimmel paused for dramatic effect, clearly savoring the setup for what he believed would be another easy target for his brand of humor. "Please welcome the one and only Nicolas Cage." The curtain parted, and Cage emerged with his characteristic intensity, dressed in a sharp black suit that seemed to absorb the studio lights. His eyes swept across the audience before settling on Kimmel, and for a brief moment, something unreadable flickered across his face. The applause was thunderous, but Cage's expression remained stoic as he made his way to the guest chair. As they shook hands, the contrast between the two men was stark. Kimmel's grip was performatively firm, his smile wide and media-trained. Cage's handshake was brief, professional, but there was a wariness in his eyes that the cameras caught in close-up. "Nick, Nick, Nick," Kimmel began as they settled into their seats, already slipping into his patronizing tone. "First off, thanks for being here. I have to say, when my producers told me you were coming on, I immediately started rewatching some of your more memorable performances." The audience laughed, but Cage's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He leaned back in his chair, studying Kimmel with the intensity of a predator sizing up potential prey. "I appreciate the opportunity to be here, Jimmy," Cage replied, his voice measured but carrying an edge that seemed to vibrate through the studio air. "Though I'm curious which performances you found so memorable." Kimmel's grin widened, mistaking Cage's restraint for vulnerability. This was exactly where he wanted the conversation to go. "Well, where do I even start? There's the bees scene from The Wicker Man, your Elvis impression in Wild at Heart. And who could forget, not the bees, not the bees. I mean, come on, that's internet gold right there." The audience erupted in laughter and applause, some even mimicking the infamous line. But Cage didn't join in the merriment. Instead, he stared at Kimmel with growing intensity, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "You know, Jimmy," Cage said, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade, "it's interesting how people reduce an actor's entire body of work to a few moments taken out of context. The Wicker Man was a passion project, a deliberate choice, to explore themes of masculinity and powerlessness in a matriarchal society." Kimmel waved dismissively, his media-trained reflexes kicking in to deflect any serious discussion. "Oh, come on, Nick. You can't tell me you were thinking about all that deep stuff when you were running around screaming about bees. Sometimes a meme is just a meme, right, folks?" The audience laughed again, but the energy in the room was beginning to shift. Cage's posture had changed, straightening in his chair like a coiled spring. His eyes never left Kimmel's face, and those in the front rows could see the actor's jaw working silently. "That's exactly the problem," Cage said, his voice gaining strength and conviction. "Everything gets reduced to sound bites and memes. 30 years of work, of pushing boundaries, of taking risks that other actors wouldn't dare take, and it all gets boiled down to a punchline for your monologue." Kimmel's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place, but there was something different about it now. Harder, more defensive. "Hey, I'm just giving the people what they want. You've got to admit, some of your choices have been, let's say, unconventional." "Unconventional?" Cage's voice rose slightly, causing several audience members to shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Is that what we're calling artistic integrity now? I've worked with some of the greatest directors of our time. I've won an Oscar. I've brought characters to life that nobody else could have touched." The studio had grown noticeably quieter, the earlier laughter replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to press against everyone present. Kimmel glanced quickly at his producers off stage, looking for guidance but found only worried faces staring back at him. "Look, Nick, I think you're taking this a little too seriously," Kimmel said, trying to regain control of the situation with a nervous chuckle. "We're just having fun here. This is comedy, entertainment. People come here to laugh, not to get a film school lecture." Cage leaned forward, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made several audience members audibly gasp. "And that's the problem with shows like this, isn't it? Everything has to be a joke. Every artist who dares to be different, who refuses to play it safe, becomes target practice for your brand of lazy humor." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Kimmel's face flushed red as he realized this wasn't going according to his carefully planned script. For a moment, the only sound in the studio was the hum of the cameras and the barely audible whisper of the air conditioning. Kimmel's producers were frantically gesturing from the wings, their panic evident even in the dim backstage lighting. The audience sat in stunned silence, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond typical late-night banter. Kimmel's media-trained instincts kicked in, his defensive mechanisms activating like armor. His smile returned, but it was different now, sharper, more venomous. "Wow, okay, somebody needs to switch to decaf," he said, gesturing toward Cage with exaggerated concern. "Look, I get it, Nick. You're an artist. You take yourself very seriously. But let's be honest here. You've made some pretty ridiculous movies." The audience offered a few scattered chuckles, but the energy was wrong. They could feel the genuine anger radiating from Cage, and many were beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the manufactured drama they were used to seeing on talk shows. Cage's hands gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles whitening. "Ridiculous?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Ghost Rider made over $200 million worldwide. National Treasure launched a franchise. Face Off is considered a masterpiece of action cinema. But sure, let's focus on the moments that make you feel superior." "Hey, hey, hey," Kimmel interrupted, raising his hands in mock surrender while his tone grew increasingly condescending. "I never said you weren't successful. Money doesn't equal quality, though, does it? I mean, Transformers made billions, but that doesn't make them Citizen Kane." The comparison hit Cage like a physical blow. His eyes flashed with something primal, and several audience members in the front row actually leaned back in their seats. "You want to talk about Citizen Kane?" Cage's voice was rising now, all pretense of politeness abandoned. "Orson Welles took risks. He broke rules. He refused to conform to what Hollywood expected. That's what real artists do, Jimmy. They don't play it safe making jokes about people who actually create something." Kimmel's smile was becoming more strained by the second, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. The audience could see him digging in, preparing for a fight he clearly wasn't equipped to handle. "Creating something? Nick, you literally made a movie where you punched a woman while dressed as a bear. That's not art. That's a Saturday Night Live sketch." The studio erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. Even Kimmel's band members exchanged worried glances. This had crossed a line, and everyone in the room could feel it. Cage shot to his feet so suddenly that his chair rolled backward, the sound of its wheels on the floor unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. That woman was Catherine Lanassa, a professional actress who understood the context of that scene better than you ever could. But you reduce it to a punchline because thinking about the actual meaning would require effort you're not willing to make. "Sit down, Nick," Kimmel said, but his voice cracked slightly. He was losing control of the situation, and everyone could see it. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" Cage's laugh was bitter and sharp. "I'm not the one making a living by tearing down people who actually take risks. I'm not the one hiding behind a desk, throwing stones at artists while contributing nothing meaningful to the conversation." The audience was dead silent now, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Kimmel's face had gone from red to pale, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead under the hot studio lights. His producers were making increasingly frantic gestures. From the wings! But he seemed frozen, unable to navigate this uncharted territory. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy?" Cage continued, his voice building to a crescendo that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. "You've never created anything in your life that required real courage. You've never put yourself on the line for your art. You've never had to defend a vision that other people didn't understand. So when you see someone who has, your instinct is to tear them down, to make yourself feel better about your own mediocrity." Kimmel's mouth opened and closed soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. The cameras caught every moment of his humiliation in unforgiving high definition. Finally, Kimmel found his voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper that the microphones barely picked up. You can't talk to me like that. This is my show." He tried to summon his usual bravado, but it fell flat in the face of Cage's righteous fury. "Your show?" Cage's laugh was sharp and humorless. "This isn't a show, Jimmy. This is a circus, and you're the ringmaster cracking a whip at anyone who dares to be different. You invite guests on here not to celebrate their work, but to humiliate them for your audience's entertainment." The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many covering their mouths in shock. This wasn't the sanitized, scripted drama they were accustomed to seeing on television. This was raw, unfiltered emotion playing out in real time, and it was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Kimmel attempted to regain his composure, straightening his tie with shaking hands. "Look, if you can't handle a little good-natured ribbing, maybe late-night television isn't for you. This is how the game is played, Nick. Everyone knows that." "The game?" Cage stepped closer to Kimmel's desk, his imposing presence casting a shadow over the host. "Is that what you call it when you mock someone's life's work? When you reduce years of dedication and craft to a 30-second bit for your opening monologue? You're not playing a game, Jimmy. You're destroying careers." For laughs, the tension in the room was suffocating. Security guards had positioned themselves at the edge of the stage, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. The director in the control room was frantically signaling to keep the cameras rolling, knowing they were capturing television gold, even as the situation spiraled beyond anyone's control. Kimmel's voice grew more desperate, more defensive. "I'm not destroying anything. I'm giving people what they want to see. Comedy, entertainment. If you can't laugh at yourself, then—" "At myself?" Cage's voice exploded through the studio like thunder. "You're not asking me to laugh at myself, Jimmy. You're asking me to participate in my own degradation. You want me to smile and nod while you turn my passion into a punchline for people who've never risked anything in their entire lives." The host's face had gone ashen, beads of sweat now clearly visible on his forehead. His usual confidence had evaporated completely, leaving behind a man who looked small and powerless behind his oversized desk. We were just having fun. It's comedy, Nick. It's not personal." "Not personal?" Cage's eyes blazed with an intensity that made several audience members actually flinch. "Every choice I've made as an actor has been personal. Every role I've taken has been a piece of my soul that I've shared with the world. And you sit there behind your desk, making jokes about things you don't understand, reducing art to entertainment gossip." Kimmel tried one last desperate attempt to regain control, his voice cracking as he spoke. Okay, let's just take a breath here. We can edit this out, start over. Nobody has to see this." "Edit it out?" Cage's laugh was bitter and cold. "Of course you want to edit it out, because heaven forbid your audience sees what happens when someone actually stands up to your bullying. Heaven forbid they see the real Jimmy Kimmel, the one who can't handle it when his targets fight back." The studio had become so quiet that the sound of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Even the band had stopped their usual background chatter, staring at the confrontation with wide eyes. The cameras continued to roll. capturing every moment of Kimmel's complete breakdown. Cage turned to face the audience directly, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. "You want to know what's really funny? This man makes millions of dollars every year by tearing down people who actually create something meaningful. He's built his entire career on the creative failures and personal struggles of others, and you all laugh along because it makes you feel superior." Some audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, a few even looking away from Cage's piercing gaze. The uncomfortable truth of his words was settling over the room like a heavy blanket. Kimmel made one final attempt to salvage the situation, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nick, please, can we just—" "No." Cage's single word cut through, the air like a blade. "We can't just anything. You invited me here to be your entertainment, your dancing monkey. But I'm not going to dance for you anymore, Jimmy. And I'm not going to let you reduce my life's work to a cheap laugh." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Cage's heavy breathing and the distant hum of studio equipment. Kimmel sat frozen behind his desk, completely defeated. Cage straightened his jacket with deliberate precision, his movements slow and controlled, as he prepared to deliver his final words. The entire studio held its breath, sensing that whatever came next would be the climax of this unprecedented confrontation. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy?" Cage's voice was calm now, but carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. "You had the opportunity to have a real conversation with someone who's dedicated their life to their craft. Instead, you chose to make me the butt of your jokes because it's easier than actually engaging with art." Kimmel's lips moved soundlessly, but no words came out. His face had drained of all color, and his hands trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of his desk. The confident host who had swaggered onto the stage 30 minutes earlier was nowhere to be found. "I've spent 40 years in this business," Cage continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I've worked with directors like David Lynch, the Coen brothers, and Martin Scorsese. I've brought characters to life that will outlive both of us. And you reduce all of that to internet memes and cheap punchlines." The audience was transfixed, many leaning forward in their seats, as if witnessing a masterclass in dignity under fire. Even the production crew had stopped their usual bustling activity, standing motionless as Cage delivered what felt like a verdict on the entire entertainment industry. "But here's what you don't understand, Jimmy," Cage said, turning to face the cameras directly. "Real artists don't create for the approval of people like you. We create because we have something to say, something that matters, and no amount of mockery from mediocre entertainers can diminish that." Kimmel finally found his voice, though it came out as a pathetic croak. I'm sorry, Nick. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean what?" Cage whipped around to face him, his eyes blazing. "You didn't mean to insult my work? You didn't mean to make a career out of belittling others? Or you didn't mean to get caught doing it in front of an audience that can finally see you for what you really are?" The host's attempted apology died in his throat. He looked around desperately for help from his producers, but they had retreated into the shadows, leaving him to face Cage's wrath alone. "You want to know what's truly pathetic?" Cage's voice rose one final time, filling every corner of the studio. "You've been given this platform, this opportunity to celebrate creativity and human achievement, and instead you've turned it into a factory for producing cynicism and cheap laughs at the expense of people who actually risk something." With that, Cage reached up and unclipped his microphone, the small device hitting the floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the silent studio. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had held the audience captive, and several people began to murmur. Nervously, "I'm done here," Cage announced, his voice carrying clearly without amplification. "I came here believing we could have a conversation between professionals. Instead, I found a bully who's never created anything worth defending." He turned toward the exit, but paused for one final moment, looking back at Kimmel with something that might have been pity. "You know what's really sad, Jimmy? Somewhere inside you, there might have been someone capable of more than this. But you chose the easy path of tearing others down instead of building something yourself. Kimmel opened his mouth one last time, perhaps to offer another apology or make one final attempt at salvaging his dignity, but Cage was already walking away. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence as he strode purposefully toward the stage. Exit. His head held high and his shoulders straight. The cameras followed his every step, capturing the moment as one of Hollywood's most enigmatic actors delivered a masterclass in standing up to institutional bullying. As he reached the curtain, Cage paused and looked back at the audience one final time. To anyone watching this who's ever been told their dreams don't matter, who's ever been mocked for taking risks or caring too deeply about their art, don't let them make you smaller. The world needs people who are willing to be different, who refuse to play it safe. With those words, Nicolas Cage disappeared through the curtain, leaving behind a studio full of stunned faces and a host whose career would never recover from the night he tried to humiliate a true artist and found himself exposed instead. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, the weight of the silence crushing down on him as the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. The show that was supposed to celebrate his wit had become a monument to his cruelty, broadcast live to millions of viewers who had just witnessed the complete dismantling of his carefully constructed persona. The cameras finally stopped rolling, but the damage was already done. Within hours, clips of the confrontation would spread across social media, and Jimmy Kimmel's reputation would never be the same.